Labadiena, man atrodo, kad jau pats laikas pradėti mūsų diskusiją labai svarbia tema. Dėkui visiems, kurie čia yra, kurie yra prisijungę ir kurie dar klausysi šitos diskusijos. Tai čia, aišku, iniciatyva yra Vilniaus Moterų namų. Džiaugiuosi, kad galėjau prie jos prisidėti. Džiaugiuosi, kad turime svečių. Profesorė Elizabeth Gilchrist. Welcome. Pradėsiu lietuviškai, paskui perduosiu žodį jums. Ir šiandien svarstysime iš tiesų, kadangi vis tiek pati diskusija yra labiau dedikuota Lietuvos žmonėms, ypatingai Lietuvos moterims. Tai šiandien svarstysime lyčiai jautrios kalbos svarbą įstatvedystėje, įstatymų kūryboje, sakykime taip. Ir pilietinių organizacijų bei Seimo narių bendradarbiavimą rengiant ir priimant įstatymus, reglamentuojančių su lytimis susijusios smurto įveikimą. Profesorė Gilchrist Edinburgo universitete Škotijoje yra socialinių mokslų sveikatos mokyklos klinikinės psichologijos katedros akademinė vadovė ir magistrantūros psichologinių terapinių programos direktorė. Tai patirtis yra tikrai labai įspūdinga ir kompetencija yra tikrai labai įspūdinga. Ir jos tyrimų sritis yra intimaus partnerio smurto bei smurto prieš moteris problema ir jos įveikimas. Ji yra pripažinta teisės psichologijos srities mokslininkė, veikianti kaip tarptautinė ekspertė ir teikusi savo ekspertinę nuomonę ir Europos tarybai, ir atskirų šalių, kaip Turkijos, Gruzijos, Bulgarijos, Armenijos, netgi Jungtinių valstijų ir Naujosios Zelandijos vyriausybėms. Ir profesorė taip pat yra Škotijos daugiaparlamentinės grupės sprendžiančios su lytimis susijusios smurto problemą narė. Tai welcome you again. Thank you for being here. Ir taip pat, žinoma, čia dalyvauja ir Vilniaus Moterų namai ir žmonės dirbantys su moterų teisų apsaugos ir jų įtvirtinimu, su lytimis susijusiu smurtu. Jos yra ekspertės, Seimo narė čia aš esu. Ir taip pat tikiuosi, kad pažiūrės ir Seimo žmogaus teisų komiteto nariai šitą konferenciją. Tai dabar platesnei tokiai introdukcijai norėčiau vis dėlto perduoti žodį gerbiamai Vilijai, o paskui nebejotinai profesoriai Gilchrist. So, Thank you, Lilija.
Ačiū labai. Yra toks reikalavimas, kad mes kalbėtume lietuviškai, tiesa, nes tai yra susijęs su Lietuvos Seimu. Tai aš tada kalbėsiu lietuviškai. I'm obliged to talk Lithuanian because in Lithuanian Seimas we need to talk Lithuanian and there should be translation. Yes, but this time maybe Susanna serve as a translator. Okay. Taigi, aš tiesiog labai dėkinga gerbiamai Jurgitai Sejonienei už aplamai dėmesį moterų žmogaus teisų klausimams. Čia yra nebe pirmas mūsų kontaktas ir aš tikrai labai džiaugiuosi, kad Seime moterys, taip pat turėčiau paminėti Laisvės frakcijos narės, visų pirma Morgana Danielė, kuri taip pat tikėtina jungsis prie mūsų, galbūt nuotoliu. Ieva Pakarklytė, žodžiu, ir kitas Seimo moteris, kurios...
Ir Dovilė Šakalienė.
Prašau?
Ir Dovilė Šakalienė.
Kurios šiaip rūpinasi moterų žmogaus teisų problematiką. Ir aš labai tikiuosi, kad mes kažkaip atgaivinsim tą bendradarbiavimą, kuris buvo tikrai gyvas ir prasmingas atgimimo pradžioje tarp moterų nevyriausybinių organizacijų ir Seimo narių. Ir kartu mes tuo metu priėmėm su Seimo narėm nevyriausybinės organizacijos moterų ir vyrų lygių galimybių įstatymą. Ir tuomet mes galėjom didžiuotis, kad Europoje buvome pirmieji, Rytų Europoje, postsovietinėse šalyse, ir taip pat sukūrė moterų ir vyrų lygių galimybių kontrolierės institucija, vėlgi pirmieji šitam regione. Tačiau toliau atėjo atžanga. Ir kažkaip pabiro tas mūsų bendradarbiavimas, turbūt tariant apie blogą mažai, bet apie gerą daugiau. Manau, kad yra tam tikras proveržis Lietuvoje ir su moteriausybė, su vyriausybė, kuri pirmą kartą istorijoje yra subalansuota į lyties atžvilgiu. Ir tiesą sakant, atleiskit už mano tokį galbūt aštrų humorą, bet moteris taiga pamatė, kad nepaisant jų statuso, nepaisant parlamentarės ir Seimo narės statuso, jos taip pat yra lygiai taip pat puolamos seksistų, patriarchato ir kad gal vis dėlto mes sėdim visos vienoje valtyje. Kad ne tik tai moteris apskritai patiria įvairialypę diskriminaciją ir su lytimi susijusių smurtą, bet iš principo tokias rafinuotas, o kartais ir labai nerafinuotas smurto formas patiria ir tos moteris, kurios yra iškilios, kurios yra daug ko pasiekusios ir kad tai yra bendra tendencija slopinti jas taip pat, jų gyvenimą apkartinti, aplamai neigti jų nuopelnus ir daug kitų dalykų. Todėl aš labai tikiuosi, kad galbūt tas bendradarbiavimas tarp mūsų žolės šaknų lygių, moterų žmogaus teisių aktyvisčių ir Seimo narių, jisai vėl taps realybę ir mes kartu, visų pirma, kas dabar yra aktualu, galbūt koreguosime apsaugos nuo smurto artimoje aplinkoje įstatymo 16 straipsnį, kuris naikina specializuotą kompleksinę pagalbą ir atitinkamai blogina nevyriausybinio organizacijų padėtį, nes naikina joms tam tikrą nišą, kuri buvo sukurta ir jau 10 metų sėkmingai veikia, būtent teikiant specializuotą kompleksinę pagalbą, informavimą, konsultavimą, palaikymą, specializuotą teisinę pagalbą, specializuotą psichologinę pagalbą, interesų atstovavimą institucijose. Tai, kas buvo be galo patrauklu moterims, aplamai smurtą patiriančiams moterims. Ir štai dabar tas atžangos ir tas dešiniosios, būtent radikaliosios dešinės veikimas, jisai ketina atimti iš Lietuvos moterų ir Lietuvos moterų nevyriausybinio organizacijų tą nedidelį saulės lopinėlį, kurį mes kažkaip sugebėjom išsikovoti ir kuris, tiesą sakant, absoliučiai pasitvirtino visais atžvilgiais. Taip pat ir ekonominių, bet tai yra kita didelė tema. Todėl aš labai džiaugiuosi, kad Seimo narės jungiasi prie mūsų, o dar labiau džiaugiuosi, kad pas mus atvyksta tokios iškilios moteris, kurios senosiose demokratijose yra pasiekusios to, ko mes dar galbūt tik tai siekiam. Man svarbiausia, kad akademikai Škotijoje konsultuoja parlamentą ir gerbiama Elizabeth Gilchrist, jinai yra viena iš tų akademikių, psichologijos srities ekspertų, kuri būtent padeda Seimo nariams suvokti, kaip tai paveiks tai, ką jie priima, kad būtent tas įstatymdavystės iniciatyvas, kaip tai paveiks vartotoją. Ir aš manau, kad tai yra begaliniai svarbu, nes kaip mes visi žinom, moterų yra didžioji visuomenės dalis, bet kurie visuomeniai, dėl to, kad moteris gyvena ilgiau. Tai tiesiog labai džiaugiuosi iš jo susitikimų, dėkoju savo kolegiams iš Vilniaus Moterų namų, nuoširdžiai dėkoju savo kolegijai Esmeraldai Kulešytei, kuri yra šeimos planavimo ir seksualinės sveikatos asociacijos direktorė. Ir mes esam senas bendražygės, nors esam jaunus, bet esam ilgalaikės, ilgametės bendražygės, kartu organizavom 4. Lietuvos moterų suvažiavimą ir galbūt tikimės suorganizuoti 5. Lietuvos moterų suvažiavimą, kuriame taip pat intensyviai dalyvaus Seimo narės, kaip dalyvavo pereitame. Ir mes kartu vėl iškelsime moterų žmogaus teisų klausimą į deramą lygį Lietuvoje, tam, kad jis būtų sprendžiamas visos visuomenės labai. Taigi labai dėkoju gerbiamai Jurgitai Sejonienei, Seimo nariai, gerbiamai Elizabeth Gilchrist ir mano kolegiams, kad šiandien mes esame čia. Dėkoju.
So I think that Mrs. Professor Elizabeth could join us with her insights and her maybe very practical points, what Lithuania should do and how Lithuania looks in context of human rights and women's rights.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you very much for having me. It's a privilege to be here, and it's been very helpful and interesting to hear more about Lithuania and where it sits in terms of gender equality, in terms of new legislation to address intimate partner abuse. to give you, I think you have some of my background, but more of my background as a forensic psychologist. I'm ex-chair of the Division of Forensic Psychology for Scotland, and more importantly, ex-chair of the Scottish Advisory Panel on Offender Rehabilitation. So a lot of the work that I have done is to set standards and hold accountable our prison and probation service in terms of using evidence-based practice. Now, to put this in context, in Scotland we have a large intimate partner violence programme, which addresses behaviour of men who are convicted of intimate partner abuse and provides support for women and children. And it's seen as a whole system. And one of the things that I did as chair was to accredit the whole system so that we have in law and within our system a requirement for all victims of domestic abuse to be supported, so that we don't just try and address one part of the behaviour, that we recognise it, that there's a huge amount of safety planning and support that is required. Linked to that, we have a legislation in Scotland and a policy called Equally Safe, which actually puts our response to domestic abuse within a far broader context of promoting gender equality in economics, across cultural access, education, etc. So in Scotland, which is a separate law and legal system and always has had from the rest of the UK. So we do not have the same law as England. We've never had the same laws. We have a gender-based definition of domestic abuse in Scotland. And the reason it was created as a gender-based definition was to reflect the reality that the majority of intimate partner abuse in Scotland is perpetrated by men against women. And also because in Scotland it was seen that violence against women and girls, and we have a strategy to deal with violence against women and girls, is part of a broader societal inequality. And that comes historically and is supported by societal institutions. So in Scotland there's a very, very clear link up across. It's not just a justice issue, it's not just a health issue, it's not just a probation issue, it's across all areas. So it's seen as we need to have violence against women and girls strategies in each local authority, and each local authority is held accountable for that. So I think for me, a lot of what I do focuses on holding men accountable and making sure that full risk assessments are done, that men are prosecuted. We're also doing a lot in terms of prevention in schools, and also a lot in terms of actually ensuring that victim survivors have access to appropriate support, financial support, housing, etc., and advice. So it's huge, but I'm very pleased to come from a country which has that gender-based definition. In addition to that, fairly recently, so 2018, Scotland enacted one of the new coercive control laws. So up until then, we had assaults, abuse, stalking, harassment legislation, which was exacerbated. So being domestic was seen as being an aggravating factor, not as making it lesser, but as aggravating. We had very robust prosecution processes so that victimless prosecutions were entirely supported, and that the public prosecutor, our Crown Prosecution Service, which is actually the Crown Office Procurator Fiscal Service in Scotland, would take forward prosecutions on behalf of the public. So it was seen as being contrary to the public interest to have domestic abuse. It was not seen as driven by individual private victims. So there was no onus, in fact, not necessarily even the right to withdraw the prosecution by individual victims, because it was seen as being against what we wanted as a society. So it's not individual prosecution. But that was an aggravating factor in Scotland. However, it was recognised that actually we were still responding to sporadic, episodic, violent incidents, whereas we know from response and reactions from victim survivors that actually the more problematic behaviour in some ways is the psychological abuse, the using emotional abuse, the stuff that's very difficult to see, and that it is ongoing, creates a climate of fear, creates a climate of dependency, detracts from women's independence, their ability to function on their own, their sense of self-worth, and actually there was no way of prosecuting that on its own. So along with Ireland and England, Scotland independently created their coercive control laws. So within that law, it is now illegal in Scotland to prevent somebody, a partner, living independently. It is illegal. And they have put in you don't need to demonstrate the impact. You need to demonstrate that it could cause that impact, and you're allowed to bring expert evidence in. I think the final element of support, within the legislation in Scotland is that all victim survivors of intimate partner abuse are immediately deemed to be vulnerable victims, so that all the legislation and all the support in order to allow people, for example, to give evidence remotely, to be supported giving evidence, to record evidence, to be able to arrive at court separately and be protected from threats and coercion from perpetration, is there. So they don't need to demonstrate that they have been impacted, but merely by the fact of being affected by gender-based violence, you are already a vulnerable victim and entitled to more support to go through the criminal justice system. And in some of the areas we have really specific organisations. For example, in Glasgow we have an organisation called Assist, which will proactively contact any women reporting intimate partner abuse and support them throughout the whole process. Because it's recognised it's such a difficult thing to do. So, yeah, I could talk for hours.
Of course. I could ask if I can, if I'm allowed. Is it, how easy it comes to change the woman recognition and opinion on the domestic violence? Because there are some religion things, and some traditional things that women think that they have to be this as servant to a man, and also collection of the evidence is also quite a big issue, I think, for women to start the process, the legal process.
Yeah, I think it may be that Scotland as a Protestant country has a slightly different heritage. In the Church of Scotland, we have had female ministers for decades. From when my father was an elder in the church, we have quite a strong Christian tradition, but we're all seen as brothers and sisters in Christ, rather than as having one person as a leader and one person as a servant. The king is not our head of our church. We have a moderator of the Church of Scotland, and the moderator has often been a woman. So we have a far more equal sense of what is going on within Christianity, but very much there. So that's not been used in Scotland as saying that we would continue to perpetrate violence against a member of a family. It just doesn't seem to make sense. In terms of prosecution, the Crown Office, the Procurator Fiscal Service, existed before the police forces in Scotland. So the duty of the Crown Office, Procurator Fiscal Service, our public prosecution, is to investigate all offences, and they are the ones who will start the prosecution process. They also can direct the police. So it's lawyers who make the decision, who I think to an extent are more trained around human rights and equality, but they would be the ones to direct the investigation. It is not up to the women to prove, the offences. The police have the duty to investigate and provide the evidence, and the fiscal service will be the ones demanding that. And the policy in Scotland is that all reported offences will be proactively prosecuted. So it's the fiscal who will direct the police to collect the evidence. If I come back to the victimless prosecution, we have sheriffs in Scotland. So we have the Sheriff Court and the High Court. Again, the system is very different from England. We don't have magistrates' courts. We have legally trained sheriffs who will sit for the mid-range cases. So most domestic abuse cases will come in front of a sheriff. And they will proactively expect evidence to be given. So if a woman is unable to attend court for whatever reason, they will expect the police to have investigated as much as they would have any other offence where they don't know who the perpetrator is. So you wouldn't not investigate a burglar, so they won't not investigate intimate partner abuse. the big shift, I think, and this started with the Metropolitan Police in London, was they started to think of domestic abuse incidents, which didn't potentially lead to a prosecution in the end, but as being prevented homicides, not as failed prosecutions. So every case that they investigated where there was not a death was seen as a positive. So they changed the KPIs, the key performance indicators. And if you think about it, that every domestic abuse incident has the possibility of being a homicide, and we know who the perpetrator is, we have a real opportunity to do something. Doing nothing is not an option. So that, you know, those were the words that came out, that we're preventing a homicide every time we do something.
What was the rate of domestic violence in Scotland before, and what is now? The rate, I mean, the numbers. Because in Lithuania we have thousands, from about 30,000, 60,000, yeah. Calls for help, yeah.
So I was going to say, it depends what you're asking, because we don't have domestic abuse assault separate to assault. In the crime statistics, it's really difficult to identify what the domestic abuse assaults are, because they're an aggravator, not necessarily always recorded. But I would imagine it's pretty similar. In terms of the reporting, I think the reporting has increased as our public awareness has increased, so I don't think it has become lesser. But I think if we look at our health statistics, there are fewer people seeking help at A&E, so emergency services, as a result of domestic abuse subsequent to the new legislation. So I think there's a range of things you'd need to see. So you would want to have more prosecutions. We want them to come to court. And we have prosecutions that couldn't have happened before because there wasn't coercive control legislation. It's only, I think, last year that we had the first prosecutions of coercive control alone, so not as an additional charge on physical violence, but absolutely and separate to just purely saying that this was controlling behaviour and it was inappropriate, and men have been prosecuted on that now.
May I ask a question? Okay. So maybe it would be useful. So we're turning to English. Is it okay for the Seimas and for those who listen?
Of course
it's okay. So maybe we can just just emphasize something important. Something important progress, what Scotland has achieved in those years, and what is lacking in Lithuania. So first of all, when we are talking about amendment of our protection from violence law, if we would be lucky and we would have that working group at some Seimas committee, or maybe women parliamentarians would make a group to do that. So it's very important just to put in it that gender specific, to write it in gender specific language. And as Professor was telling us, that then everyone knows what is it that we are confronting with. This is violence, men's violence against women, because otherwise, if we have that, and I would ask, do you agree, Professor? So now we send a very confusing message to the public, but first of all, to the institutions who deal with the problem. If we treat equally perpetrator and the victim, so we're not obliged to do anything specific to the victim, you know. And so we have good international documents. We have victims directives say, but it's very, very poorly implemented, because we do not do differentiation between the state's obligations towards the victim and the perpetrator. So prosecution in Lithuania is very poor, and the numbers are going down, and they go down dramatically from 42% in 2018 to 10% and less in the every year, just going down. So, you know, so first of all, maybe that should be that gender-specific language in the legislation that would send an adequate message to the public and to the institutions. And another thing is, then we could have that other steps we could then now, people are just complaining, and police, as I know, that it's very difficult and impossible to prove, say, psychological violence. So another step, which is very remarkable in Scotland, is that recent law that criminalizes coercive control. Coercive control is the root cause. No, it's the first stage, perhaps, of violence, and other forms of violence step from it. But the root cause is, of course, gender inequality and unequal power between women and men. And until we do not use gender-specific language, the power issue is not addressed too. And if we have a CEDAW that we have ratified, and we have periodical reports of our state to the CEDAW committee, how it is being implemented, but it is not being implemented. I can tell you, because I was behind the shadow report in 2019. We did it in Vilniaus Women's House. How is it implemented concerning violence against women? So I think, first of all, this is a gender-specific language, and after that we could proceed criminalizing just psychological abuse, and maybe we can even have that high ambition to think and to start to discuss that coercive control, which is žalojantį kontrolę in Lithuanian law, to be somehow implemented, and maybe we could expect some collaboration with Scottish experts and Parliament, how they put it in, what wording they used, how they put it in their legislation. So maybe I would. And one more thing. You know, I have forgotten to say this, but I want to tell this now. We have Zuzana Vasiliauskaitė, our board member of Vilniaus Women's House, and she is a fresh doctor of sciences in criminal psychology. And she only yesterday, she just very successfully defended her doctoral thesis. And so now we could be a big asset to all of us, and I hope parliamentarians also, as an international expert and doctor of sciences. So.
Okay, we have some more members, and then there's debate and discussion. So please.
You know, I would like to learn about the beginning in Scotland, about the laws which were for prevention of violence for women, and what is the situation with the Istanbul Convention.
Yeah. I don't think the UK Parliament has, we have interesting devolved powers. So I think it's the UK that was to sign up or not to the Istanbul Convention.
Oh yes, they did it.
So that was UK legislation. So Scotland doesn't have its own ability to sign up to new. I mean, the law in Scotland existed prior to the union of the Crowns and the Parliaments in 1718, and one of the issues about joining, 1707. Was that England wasn't allowed to tinker with the laws of Scotland, so the criminal law remains entirely separate. In terms of the law in Scotland for criminal law, it's less codified than in England. So we have common law, and the law is neutral. However, within assaults, there are aggravating factors. So the fiscal service, the prosecution would take certain features as aggravating it. So racism, for example, will aggravate any offence, and sexism or misogyny will aggravate any offence. So it being a domestic aggravates the offence in Scotland. We actually have consideration. I sit on the Criminal Law Committee of the Law Society of Scotland as the only non-law member, as the psychologist, to look at new legislation. And there is legislation going through Parliament just now to look at misogyny, to have misogyny criminalised in Scotland. So that's where we're at the moment in terms of the law in Scotland, that we have coercive control and they're looking to criminalise misogyny.
And what institutions they were created for implementation of the laws? Or not created, perhaps they existed?
The Crown Office, Procurator Fiscal Service, the sheriffs, so that we've got the court system, we have the Crown Office, Public Prosecutor. So they have existed from before the police existed. So it's the Procurator Fiscal Service. And they're very influential in terms of the policy and direction of policy and prosecution of offences in Scotland. And they have taken a very strong gender-based approach to violence against women and girls. But it fits within the overall Scottish policy. So we have a very strong parliamentary, more broad government policy called Equally Safe, where there is a strategy, and it's been in place for the past maybe 15 years, to ensure that we promote equality through a range of different means in education, in commerce, and et cetera, and the strategy to address the criminal aspects of violence against women and girls is just one element of that.
And if it is about education, yes, what kind of programs do you have in schools, for example?
In Scotland.
Schools, in Scotland.
In Scotland. So we would have, it's PSE, I think they call it, I can't remember, personal social education. So they would be promoting what is a positive and healthy relationship, positive sexual relating, positive physical health, positive mental health, what to expect. So they deal with a lot of things like that. We had some quite hard-hitting public campaigns around whether or not, so dating violence and sexual coercion within dating violence on TVs and media in Scotland. So all of that is dealt with at the early years of senior school in Scotland, so when children are maybe between 12 and 14. And it's in all schools.
So if I understood correctly, there are a lot of ministries that are responsible for implementing gender equality, as you said. So it's education, it's protection. Yeah. So it's not only one specific ministry, but every ministry has its own role in implementing it.
Yes, so the strategy runs across all of them. We have a ministry for equality as well, so there is an equalities ministry. But we also sit within justice. I was just going to say I'll look up to get exactly which ones they are, but all of the ministries are affected by the Equally Safe. So we have legislation and policies that hold people accountable. So we have legislation to protect children, so it's called GERFEC, so Getting It Right for Every Child, and that runs across, so the rights of the child are paramount in many, many situations, and we have high levels requirements to look out for and protect vulnerable children and all children in Scotland. Equally Safe is another cross parliament, cross discipline, cross ministry expectation in Scotland that all ministries will work to that, and all government organisations will work to that. So we have to show in everything that we do that we are addressing those issues. So we've GERFEC and we've got Equally Safe, and how do we meet those requirements? So if I, as a psychologist, want to set something up, and I want some sort of government funding, I'll have to explain and demonstrate how I meet those requirements. There's an expectation that you will meet them.
I think this is very important point, that not only one ministry, as we have right now in Lithuania, that we have one specific ministry.
Social affair.
Yes, social affair and labor ministry, which is responsible for implementation of the law. And then we see that they are struggling, and at the same time we cannot make the change that will affect the whole system that needs to be affected if only one ministry is taking responsibility of it. And as it said, it's not only ministries. And as understood, also municipalities are playing their role in it. And so it's cross-cutting ministries and their institutions.
Jeigu galima aš lietuviškai pratęsiu, tikrai man bus paprasčiau. Tikrai Lietuvoje mes turime, tai problema yra, kad iš tiesų šią sritį kuruoja socialinės apsaugos ir darbo ministerija. Teisėsauga yra pavaldi vidaus reikalų ministerijai. Aišku, yra tas funkcijų pasidalinimas su savivaldybėmis. Bet aš tai manau, kad net ne čia yra, nors Lilija pačioje pradžioje iškėlė labai tikrai didelę problemą ir aš pati žinau dabar, kadangi ir Kėdainiuose rinkimuose dalyvavau, būtent su tuo specializuotos kompleksinės pagalbos centrų, na, kaip čia pasakyti, naikinimu, nenaikinimu, bet pavyzdžiui, Kėdainių moteris, na, iš esmės nebeturės galimybės, jos turės važiuoti į Kauną, jeigu joms reikės pagalbos įvykus kažkokiam tai smurtui, patyrus smurtą šeimoje, ar jeigu jos net nebeturės kur glaustis. Tai tokie sprendimai, aš tiesa negaliu atsakyti, kodėl jie buvo priimti ir kodėl jų reikėjo, bet, na, kaip visą laiką deklaruojam, kad, na, turėtų būti tas didesnis bendradarbiavimas su nevyriausybinėm organizacijom. Tai, na, šiuo atveju padaryta lik ir priešingai. Ir, na, sakau, prieinamumas pagalbos moterims akivaizdžiai turėtų pablogėti.
O dar gal galima. So it's very important, I think, what we have heard here, that municipal level has its own, I don't know, institutions like sheriffs, but at the same time, which for me is maybe even more important, that we have that plans, that strategies, local strategies to combat violence against women. So because now, because perhaps of the problem we have, this big problem has one root, so it's gender neutral language. So all the municipalities are dealing with violence against women according to the social protection, socialinių paslaugų įstatymas, the law of social services. And the law is designed to serve those people of a very high situation, those atskirties, those special groups who have no social habits, who came from the detention or grew up in children's homes and all that. So this is a very small part of population, and they have specific needs. And of course, the government has its duty to take special care for those people. But if we just try to solve the problem of domestic violence against women, so it doesn't work, and we see it very properly, but it does not work at all, because our clients are from the high strata of society. Very often they're very well educated and of the social economic high strata of society, and also, of course, all stratas of society, including the lowest. But those specialized health centers, which we, as Vilniaus Women's Health Act, since 1996, and officially since 2012, so they go very well with those specialized health centers, and very poor results are being achieved at the municipal level while using this social assistant, with another law, so maybe this is some breakthrough that somehow municipalities could be obliged or even talked into, to create the national strategy, not national, the local strategies for combating violence against women. But first of all, then we need to put in place national strategy combating violence against women, which was in place. And this was through our NGOs and Vilniaus Women's House energetic efforts since 2007, and it was quitted for no reason in 2015. So this is a huge mistake, and of course we saw the backlash after this decision was made in all spheres of the issue that we are interested to in combating violence against women. And I should be proud also for Vilnius municipality, but through our efforts, Vilniaus Women's House too, but also some people from Laisvės partija Vilija Gucevičiūtė, I should mention the previous member of the board of Vilnius City. So we created a human rights commission at the Taryba, at the council of Vilnius municipality, and now we are trying to put in place at least, if not a strategy, but at least a program for prevention and specialized help provision for the victims. So this maybe could, as we hear, this is effective in some other countries, in Scotland particularly, so maybe it could be just, it is needed in Lithuania, say. And my question to the professor would be, so on what issues and what reforms take your consultations with the parliament members? How is it arranged? Is it regular, or are you requested just to do some comments on specific, on special occasions? So, is it regular? We would like to have regular consultations. Thank you.
I sit on a cross-party parliamentary group on gender-based violence, which sits in the Scottish Parliament and is a regular event, so it's every quarter. We have a range of academics and practitioners and politicians who will attend, and we will deal with specific issues that are coming up, legislation, issues to do with financial equality, whatever, it will come forward. I also sit on a veterans cross-party parliamentary group, so that's looking at the issues of people who have served in our military forces, who've been paid for one day's service, and some of the PTSD issues that arise from that. And there's a crossover because there's a really high percentage of veterans who have perpetrated intimate partner abuse, their issues being linked to mental health, drink, drugs, and relationship issues. So it's regular on that basis. I currently am just stepping down for a role where I was paid by the Scottish Government to ensure that the interventions we had in place to support victims and also to hold perpetrators and offenders accountable were evidence-based, and that was regular. Scottish Government has funded a number of research-focused institutions, so collaborations from academics. So we have the Scottish Centre for Crime and Justice Research, which is a collaboration of 4 or 5 universities, and they are partially funded so that when the Scottish Government wants to look at new, for example, technology-facilitated abuse, they could ask a range of academics to review information and evidence and produce a report for them. We have similar for policing research as well, so SIPA, the Scottish Institute for Policing Research, is also partially funded by the Scottish Government. So there's ongoing funding as well as consultation. And then when it comes to specific aspects of legislation, it will go out for public consultation, but there will also be targeted organisations, so the Criminal Law Committee, the Division of Forensic Psychology, the Community Justice Academic Advisory Group that I also sit on, we will all be asked to comment. But most of our legislation goes out to also public consultation. So they target some of it is responsive and reactive, and we have promoted regular contact.
And I assume they see it as a support.
Yeah.
Thank you.
We're seen as a resource.
So yeah, I just wanted to say that it seems that they are happy for this collaboration. It's not that you're forcing them. They see the value of your competencies and your extent knowledge of the things. So easier to come to things that will work rather than just to go on your own, read few books, and then think that you're already educated on the issue.
Oh, absolutely. We have probably more requests for input than we can actually manage. And people are keen for us to have it to be evidence-based, and I think the argument in Scotland is that, we are supported, we're funded, we're paid by the universities, so we're paid by Scottish institutions to generate knowledge and evidence, and that knowledge exchange should come back and help the people of Scotland. So again, with research, we're always being asked, how are we going to benefit? How are we going to disseminate our work? How are we going to link? How are we going to influence and offer the information for policymakers. So it's not that we are forcing it, absolutely not. It's like we are expected to do it.
Well, I think now it's my time to react. Of course, in Lithuania, the things, I think they also go the same, because when we have the Legal Act project in the parliament, of course, we have to synchronize it with the government, because the government will have to put it into life. And of course, we always seek for the support from the government. Now, where I heard those notes about the mistrust or even the refuse of the non-governmental organization and the specialists, especially from the Ministry of Social Affairs. And well, we'll have to change it somehow. You know, I cannot directly, of course, we have to talk to the ministry, to the head of the ministry and to all the workers, and then to change this. Because as I mentioned, from my own, what I know from my hometown, the things are going wrong now.
And I really liked the point, at least as I understood how it's happening in Scotland, that it is really seen as collaboration. And I really liked how police are framing pre-trial investigation, let's say, that was not found as suitable for prosecution, that it is still prevention, that it's still very valuable work. It's not... One, I hope that they are trying to put all their efforts in order to solve the crime and to punish the perpetrator, the abuser. However, if they are not, their work still is valued and matters. Because in Lithuania, what very frustrates me that since 2012, when the law came into force, it's a very interesting thing. In first month, we had thousands of calls, while before Lithuania said that we have 200 cases of domestic violence or violence against women. And so just in few months we had tripled, doubled, and quadrupled the amount of calls. And then with every year it was growing from 12,000, and now we have 60,000. The issue is that as it was from the beginning, 10,000 pre-trial investigation, regardless of the calls increasing, the pre-trial investigations are staying and even decreasing. So they are not. So it's going backwards than it should be. And at the same time, before they try to qualify more crimes, now we don't see, like it's only nesunkus skausmo sukelimas, like very little. Yeah, so it's almost misdemeanor. So yeah, it's confliction of pain, and even though the bones are broken, there are bruises, they are minimizing the experiences the women survive, and so it's really not a good practice. So I like the encouragement of the police, that telling them that this work matters and they should really look at it as contributing to society. I know that police officers most of the times they are not happy to work in this area, and we have to bring some kind of appreciation for it. And I think if all institutions are involved, it creates more recognition. Because also, as the professor showed me in the law, it is very clearly stated where gender-based violence is stemming from, gender inequality, about women and men's status in society and equal status in society. So again, it is very important to know for us from inside what are we dealing with and how to fight it. And that's everybody's issue.
And I have one question about the NGOs. Are they strongly involved in work with, I don't know, institutions, with your consultations?
Yeah, so Scottish Women's Aid, for example, chair the the cross-party parliamentary group on domestic abuse, so yeah. So we have a range of different organisations that would support victim survivors, some of which are core funded, which is really important because unstable funding, I think, makes a big difference. So Assist, for example, the organisation that supports victim survivors to go through courts in the west of Scotland is core funded, but it would, I think, identify as an NGO. So, yeah.
And what does the, it consist of what kind of organizations? How to clarify? Yeah.
So organisations like Safe Lives, like Scottish Women's Aid, Rape Crisis, Victim Support, you know, lots of different organisations.
Safe Lives, it is about what?
So Safe Lives is an organisation that works with stalking, domestic abuse, gender-based violence. Okay. They've set up and run a lot of support organisations, Respect. So they have like helplines for people reporting. They have organisations and shelters and things. So yeah, there's just a wide variety of different organisations involved.
So where the gatherings are going and who participates in it? Parliament members, academics, NGOs, is it all, you know, the composition of that interparliamentary group?
Yeah.
Do they all come as a members of the group, yeah? And how it is with Parliament members? Is it just for their own choice? Or so some committees, parliamentary committees, send their delegates, or how it is with the parliamentarians? How do they come to that group?
And how many men are there?
Are there men?
Yeah, there are men in it. Yeah, I'm just having a look in terms of our definitions for cross-party groups in Scotland. So the groups of Scottish parliamentarians who are interested in a particular subject, they meet at least twice a year. They must attend, at least 2 MSPs who are members of the cross-party group must attend meetings. So there's a requirement for there to be parliamentarians attending. So they don't get financial support or staffing from Parliament, but they meet at the Parliament, and the Parliament doesn't pay for translation if we need it. However, we can get organisation and there's some funding available. So there's a range of different cross-party groups. And I was just trying to see if I can get the membership of the gender-based violence group. Because yes, there are men who attend as well. It's not seen as a male thing, it's a societal response and issue.
So is it one committee, say, that interparliamentarian group on all sorts of gender issues, or as you mentioned now, there is a separate group on combating violence against women?
So gender-based violence is one specific group.
Gender-based violence, okay, thank you so much. Yeah.
In terms of the numbers of groups, we've got, I mean, I sit on a 2 or 3, so we've got one on survivors of child sexual abuse, we've got one on veterans affairs, we've got one on gender-based violence. I'm not sure of all of the other ones, but yeah, there's a requirement for the parliamentarians to be there, and they're supported, and they're seen as a resource, or as helpful.
I also have a question. How often women in Scotland withdraw their appeals due to domestic violence, and why? And how often it happens in Lithuania, and how do you think why?
They cannot, right?
It's not up to the victim to withdraw. It's not a decision. The victim is a witness, a very important witness in a case. It is the Procurator Fiscal who will decide whether or not a case continues to court. That will be based on evidence, and it will be based on the public interest. And in general, it's seen as being in the public interest to prosecute. There has been one private prosecution of a sexual offence in Scotland in the past 130 30 years. One, because it's not a private, criminal law in Scotland is not a private issue, it's a public issue.
Could you continue about Lithuania?
Okay, as representing women victims of gender-based violence, we claim that it is up to the society and up to the institutions to ensure that women are not withdrawing their reports. And in Lithuania, up till now, we have a progressive law system that it is public too. It has to be prosecuted if the woman calls and reports it to the police. And from another hand, we have a very progressive system of connection between the protection and health provision, yes. Because according to our law, and we wrote it ourselves, you know, we have, of course, very extended parliament members, and okay, but at the same time, this was NGO's hand in it, and the police is obliged to report all those cases to the specialized health centers, and they proactively contact the women. And as we have heard yesterday, when Zuzana defended her thesis, that the crucial thing in post-traumatic growth, just overcoming the victim's position and becoming a survivor, is communication, you know, that with disclosure. And so we encourage disclosure because we proactively contact the victims, and we can contact them several times because they could be a very low opinion of institutions, and they are right in that, yes. But we encourage them to take steps, and we encourage them to do something about the situation. This is not that they do not recognize, no. Simply, they have no trust in institutions, and we do trust in us. And when we talk with them, they very clearly recognize. But at the same time, we need to introduce the language. Yes, they are being taught by the Catholic Church, by the conservative family, pro-family activists, that they should be obedient, that should be value the family, and I don't know, something else. But if we talk with them on that specific language, you know, but client-friendly manner, all of them, they know that something wrong is going with them, or even when they start to make a contact with us, because at first we regard us as another institution which is not worthy to be trusted. And so sometimes it does not engage in the conversation, but if they do, so it's not a problem that women do not recognize what is happening to them. It's a problem to the system. And those 60,000 calls for police every year, it is due to perpetrated, again and again, perpetrated crimes against same women. Because the system does not do, the prosecution office, the courts, police, first of all, they do not do proper job. They do not take in considerations that it is a repeated assault, you know, and they think this is a shame. And in Lithuania, we have very good, very progressive elements of, say, progressive law, but at the same time, we have a very much outdated response of the legal system. And in this particular crime, though it is stipulated as a crime in the human rights offense, but police is not obliged to take into consideration this repeated perpetration. So that's why I think that this parliamentary group of women and NGOs and maybe academics could be of use in many directions, you know, just somebody to address those issues, not only concerning health provision, but also concerning state response to the violence, gender-based violence against women. So I think so.
Okay, now it's my time to answer. Okay, we have a parliamentary group for women reproductive health. So I think that one of the possible ways would be to extend the action of this group, not only in taking care of women reproductive rights and human reproductive rights, but also on violence and human rights. Of course, we have the Parliament Committee for Human Rights, but of course, I think, and they work for this. I know they work, but of course their field is much wider. So, of course, we could add this topic to the women reproduction group. And of course, we have to strengthen confidence of NGOs and the government. We have to improve the legal acts and educate the society, which is the most important thing, and then not the easiest one.
And question legal system. Why don't they do their proper job? Why don't we read the law properly? And why don't they act according to the law? This is the only sphere of the public prosecution that the repeated crimes are not addressed, and that every new case is treated as the only one, only this one act of abuse, but not in the context, you know. So this is a shame, you know.
Within the legislation in Scotland, the repeat acts of abuse are allowed to be taken into account, so that makes a difference. So a pattern of behaviour that isolates or demonises or constricts and restrains an individual is part of that law, and it doesn't have to include violence, but if it did, that's an aggravator. So that can be included. I mean, for me, one of the biggest things is to remove the idea that is an individual choosing to prosecute her partner or ex-partner. It's the public. It's not tolerable. We wouldn't do that for terrorism. We don't say, well, if you don't want to prosecute a terrorist offence as the victim of it, you wouldn't do it. You'd say, no, we're a country that doesn't allow that. So I don't see why you would have it any different. And I don't know why you would ever ask a victim to be the person to make a decision about whether there was sufficiency of evidence and in the public interest for that prosecution to occur. The thing that I think one of the sheriffs of the Judicial Institute of Scotland said, we were doing some training in Malta, if somebody was dead, they can't give evidence. The police would still prosecute. They would look for evidence, they would investigate, they would collect information, they would interview neighbours, they would collect forensic evidence. There's no difference. You know, if she is gagged and cannot speak because of the risk to her, the police can still do their job, the fiscal can still do their job, the prosecution can still go ahead. So a victimless prosecution is indeed quite easy.
Yeah, of course, it's difficult to add something. Yeah, of course, we have to learn a lot of things from Scotland, not only Scotland, from other countries, how to deal with those problems and how to find the ways to communicate and collaborate to reach what we want. Yeah.
And last time when we gathered NGOs and some of the parliament members, our friend and colleague Rachel Paul was speaking. She's Norwegian expert and former Grevio committee member. So we learned how the breakthrough was achieved in Norway, and it was as we are talking now, when parliamentarians, women first of all, gathered in cross-party group for collaboration and in a very close cooperation with women's NGOs, and that they, from various fractions of the parliament, they started to know same things and started to educate their fraction members and we started to push together certain laws that were very important to the women, and we were learning from NGOs what is useful for the women survivors and what is, what should be written into the law, and how it should be just what wording should be there. So I think that maybe we could start from scrap and just try to do that. Lithuania has the group of academics that are experts in gender equality at the Ministry of Social Security and Labor, but it is dormant. Nobody calls for our meetings. There is no people responsible in that ministry just to enact our being there, And so maybe that could be used, this body, because it is composed already, it exists, and we both with Susanna are there. So maybe that body could be useful for the parliamentarian, and together with NGOs and the experts, parliament members could just arrive to some useful conclusions. First of all, about protection from violence law, which is being weakened, but maybe in other directions too. So I would very much expect that those meetings would bring some positive effects on Lithuanian women, and first of all, of their human rights violations, such as gender-based violence. So thank you very
Dear
much.
Lilia, could I add? We also, as I said, we should educate the society, but we also should educate our parliamentarians. Yes, because I want to remind how many debates and discussions the term gender-based violence raised in our parliament. And a lot of women in our parliament were against this term because it discriminates. Who? Whom? Men? Women? I don't know.
We've ended up in Scotland focusing on violence against women and girls, and that's the term. So that's the strategy is used because it's clear. That's it. So it's not just gender-based violence, it's violence against women and girls. There has been controversy about equally safe because we're arguing that our young men aren't safe because of gang-related violence, and Scotland has its own challenges. So there's many reasons as to why we maybe have made the steps we had to because of the level of violence and inequality. And for example, we have a huge issue now with drugs-related deaths, and we've been tackling alcohol issues, and so I don't come here saying that we have all the answers, but I can say that we've made some steps in the direction of the violence against women and girls that appear really positive. The reports, by the way, in Scotland to the police are 65,000 domestic abuse incidents 2022. So a country which is maybe 5.5 million, as opposed to your 3.5 million, we have a similar rate. Well, we have similar numbers, so we have a lower rate.
So we are 2,800,000.
Almost 2.8 million.
That's a pity. But just in conclusion, I would like to say that yes, Parliamentary Committee for Human Rights is rather active. Yes, they do parliamentary control, but their capacity is limited because they act in many directions. So I would call for a specific gathering of women parliamentarians and academics and NGOs just to solve those gender-based violence issues, and even help the Committee for Human Rights to just with some formulations, with some, suggestions, some actualization of issues that are just urgent, pending, that decisions should be made. I think that that could be a separate unit, if you agree. And concerning education of the parliamentarians, we have to recognize, because there is a heavy evidence behind this, that we are touched to a rather big extent of the soft methodologies of Eastern countries, of Russia, of Putinism too. And there are now very important international research facts and reports that while preparing for the war in Ukraine, just with expansion to the West, they spent millions and millions and millions of I don't know, dollars and euro in those post-Soviet countries to encourage the right-wing activists to go against human rights discourse, to destabilize society and to destabilize just in the way just attacking gender issues, just making confrontation concerning gender democracy, women's human rights, reproductive rights, and violence against women. And that this campaign against Istanbul Convention, it was arranged and it was done from one center, and every country in post-Soviet world, they were they were given the discourse. Just it was translated to national languages and disseminated in those countries to say same lies and to same demonization for that convention. And so now I think that we should educate our parliament members that it is a shame to support Putin's discourse, that it is a shame to be a victim of some propaganda campaign. We should remind them that we are in European Union and we should talk language that European Union institutions demand of us, and that all those international documents that we are subject to, that were written in that gender-specific language, and that now we should recognize that there was a harm made to general public, but to the parliamentarians' minds too. And we even have maps what parliament members, and there are several parliament members who are directly connected through the money flow with that, radical groups. I would be very modest in wording, but then there can be even more stronger wordings, So we need to make that differentiation. But it is not that the public is against something. It is that there was some harm done, and we should redress it as soon as possible in the parliament too. So, thank you.
Yesterday, Professor Bagdžiūnienė, yes, it was Bagdzevičienė. Yesterday, Professor Rita Bagdzevičienė said that the violence issue, it is for politicians, it is moral issue. If they are not ready to accept some improvement or to take or to approve some laws, this is a moral issue. It means that they are against morality of society.
Yeah. I agree absolutely. But due to the separate work group in Parliament, we have so many working groups on very different issues, and half of them are half dead, because, well, when we have too much working groups, so you cannot arrange your time correctly and properly. So I still think that I should gather, and this is my promise, the women reproductive rights group, and extend the field of this working group and put together the women's rights, domestic violence, and all the other things. So I think this will be more progressive, because the people in this group, they are already familiar with the problems. Not only the reproductive rights, but all other problems that women in Lithuania deal with. So, Morgana, Daniela, Davilio Šakalinė, Andrius Navickas, and all of this. So I think we should finalize if someone else would like to add something more about, except that we still have a lot of problems and we still have to find ways how to deal with it.
But I think you
I
have...
wish us good luck.
Yes, I think the thing is that if we look internationally, there are great examples of where change has been possible. And it's not with a massive change, it's by small steps and people signing up to make the change. And I think that's it. It's like everyone here has got the opportunity to make one step towards that change. If there's a way that, you know, consulting in Scotland, linking in can help, then, you know, I'm a vehicle to that. I just think that it's together we do a lot more. We're small countries in the north of Europe. We sadly are no longer a part of Europe at the moment. However, you know, that cooperation, I think that it starts with people and starts with small steps, but with a clear vision. I mean, we're looking for an equal society. That's all we're looking for, is equally safe, so that, to borrow from Scotland, that's what we're trying to do, and it's in everybody's interests for that to happen. You know, it's society's interests, it's all of our interests. So, if I can help, I'm happy to.
Thank you so much.
Yes. And it's been a privilege coming here, and I think Scotland will have to look at how you deal with drugs issues, for example. Thank you. Thanks for the visitor center also. With me.